Well, we had a political week dominated by the secret ministries of Scott Morrison. It began with some very earnest news conferences and ended with a flurry of memes that Scott Morrison responded to on his Facebook. Joining me now is Sarah Ison from The Australian, Tom McElroy from the Australian Financial Review. Thanks both for your time. How do we end the week? We've got Monday where the sort of legal advice will be clarified as to what happens there. Labor's not touching the Governor-General aspect of this, which I get why they want to make it all about Morrison, but we don't really need to find out more about what the GG did, didn't we?
Absolutely. I caught your chat with Jenny McAllister, who absolutely was saying he did what the PM said to do, and that's completely what he should do. And you're right, didn't touch it at all. I think what's interesting now at the tail end of the week, you're having the Republican movement come out a bit more strongly now. Today, they came out with a release sort of saying, this is clear that everything we've seen in this week, not just Morrison, but the GG, etc., is showing how this system is broken, it needs reform, and actually we need to form our own republic. So that's sort of something that they've jumped on as well, and I think that's what we might be seeing a bit more on. I doubt the questions are going to end from here, not just with the GG, but also with others. Who knew what when? Is anyone telling some porkies in terms of I had no idea? Yeah. Those questions will continue into next week.
I think so. This is a really interesting point, I find, because the anti-Republican argument has often centred on, we've got this system, who are you going to vote in? Who's going to be the president? Who's going to be the safeguard? The current safeguard we have is sort of convention. People argue even what a GG should do. Legal experts this week have said he should have at least told Morrison, tell the ministers what's happened, maybe tell the public. So it just highlights the current system we've got is full of grey area, and no one dares to no politicians dare to question the role or say, give us more detail.
Yeah, there have been a few instances in political history where the norms have been tested and stretched and put under pressure. This is an example of that. But you're right, the system relies on people's good judgment, people following conventions, and when they're broken with, we get into trouble. I think Labor's smart to keep the focus on Morrison. I don't think they want to destabilise the Governor-General. Don't forget, they're trying to change the Constitution to introduce recognition of Indigenous Australians. They don't want a republic debate in this term, they want it in the next one. Andrew Podger, the former public service chief, was on the radio this morning saying he would have expected that it was the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet and the PM who were required to gazette these changes, and if someone said not to gazette them, it was probably the political actors, not the Governor-General.
No, but then the question comes whether at least he gives that counsel, and you say, well, who cares? But it's pretty hard to defy that advice once you get it, because if it comes out, the GG said this and then I didn't.
Yep.
That's where the power of the Governor-General, I think, comes in. It's not that he defies him, but he says, I believe you should make this public. And if it comes out that he didn't, then you're going against
absolutely
the Queen's representative. So that's the sort of subtle power of the Governor-General, I guess.
And the Australian people and this Parliament have the right to know exactly who did what in that circumstance. This is the constitutional conservatives side of politics. Don't forget, Scott Morrison believes in this institution. Don't weaken it. Explain what happened.
Some of his colleagues suggesting his belief in that maybe never as strong as we thought. So Labor on this, do they pivot and sort of go, so many big issues for them, right? I mean, EVs is another one today. How are you going to make sure road users pay taxes, the Jobs Summit, inflation? Do they handball this off to, I don't know, a Mark Dreyfus and say, you know, this can be your thing that you run with when you after Monday, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
After Monday, but they just need to be wary of saying something that doesn't actually affect anyone's lives. It was a great week. A lot of people probably had fun with it. They've dragged Morrison through bad headlines, but you can't do it forever.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Tom's saying there, them trying to keep the focus on Morrison and using it to score more points against kind of the coalition. It's representative of Morrison not having trusted his coalition partners and the coalition is in disarray. That is political ammunition for Labor, and they're going to want to keep that in the back pocket. So when it comes to continuing this probe and looking into this and asking these questions, I think they want that bubbling away in the background to then use to launch attacks against Morrison and in tandem the coalition to sort of talk about how they are in disarray and really put focus on those divisions, especially as we've seen between the Nationals and the coalition the last couple of days. But possibly not with as much fervour and focus as this week, because exactly right, they've got a lot to do, as Tom's saying, other constitutional changes. They're going to start to need to work with the GG. If we do keep looking at this with such intensity, the questions for the GG will probably continue along with the story, right? And then it does get complicated.
Yeah, you can't just have one part of it going.
Yeah, cherry pick one.
The GG part.
Totally.
And so this is the other thing. The biggest thing I think for Labor this term is an economic soft landing from the inflation spike. And their biggest thing during the election was wages. Anthony Albanese holding up the $1 coin. And right now we're in a position where wages are running backwards by 3.5%. So their big pledge, I'm not saying it's their fault. At some point it becomes their responsibility. But that's just so hard to unpick, isn't it? And to figure out and not let wages create the spiral, this sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, the soft landing that you describe is make or break for this term of Labor. If Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese can achieve it and prevent some of the hardest effects for workers and households from inflation, from zero real wage growth, it will have been a success. But failing that, all your other plans go out the window. Nobody cares if you've got big plans for your second term if the economy's in the toilet and you get voted out. Well, end of show. The job summit's a big part of that, fixing the migration system and their promise of real wage growth before the next election.
The tricky part around they're not saying this directly, but hang in there, we need to just batten down the hatches while inflation sorts itself out. For some families it's fine and they've got savings like never before from COVID. For others, they don't.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're just saying to them, life's going to basically be a lot worse for 6 or 9 months.
Yeah.
And then it'll improve. But it's almost like take one for the country.
Yeah, sort of. And I just think it's kind of like we have to remember during the election, and Tom, you probably remember this, I mean, both of you probably do, there was this big thing that Labor would talk about how much certain things had risen in cost under the coalition and really use it as this political thing of like, look how much, a piece of meat costs or your bread is costing. This is the coalition. And really used it as this moment of you're not happy with the former government, look at everything. And so vote us in. And all the journalists in the press pack are asking them, OK, but how much is stuff going to cost on the Labor? And they were like, no, of course, no hard figures. And now, chickens come home to roost. Here we are. And it is this thing of going, well, actually, things aren't going to be good for a while, which is, that kind of post-campaign and election moment of going, that was part of us, fighting the fight. And now the reality is actually a little bit more complicated and it's not going to be good immediately as you've kicked out the old guys,
Because initially it was like, OK, we admit wages won't get going in July after the election. And now it might be a year. And on top of that, gas prices are soaring. And whilst things were getting a bit more expensive before the election, I don't know about you, but some of the grocery shops, you're doing at the moment, it is actually becoming, wow, look at the cost of that. I know the initial thing was lettuce, but it's so far beyond that now. It's so many different items. It's not just a flood or a short-term thing. There's lots of items where you go, oh, OK, right, that's expensive. And people are changing their habits already because of how much things cost in a supermarket, which we haven't had for a while. At
the same time that interest rates are going up, mortgage stress is going to be compounding these challenges. And sections of the economy, women, for example, have to make a decision. Am I going to keep going to work when childcare costs are high? Or am I better to stay home and look after the kids and keep that part of the household income in the general spend? It's tough out there, and there's a political price for that.
One of the most curious things we get told, so you mentioned childcare, the changes Labor are going to bring in to make it cheaper middle of next year, and they keep saying, oh, if we can bring it in January, we will, it's complicated. It's just changing how much you get back from the same system.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know whether I'm sort of being naive, but they could have months to the January 1 run-up just to change how much you get back.
And it's also this really big problem that's going to face them, which the childcare sector is really, really concerned about. Which if you make childcare more affordable in any way and make the proposition make a lot more sense in terms of send your kids to childcare so you can go to work, participation in the workforce increases, etc. Demand in childcare is going to increase. There's no room for them. Like they are facing the biggest workforce shortages that they've had in years. They are really struggling, and the whole.
A lot of workers who are migrants in the sector who are not born in Australia. So, I mean, you're going to need really specific childcare visas if it's really going to.
Quite a lot. Like people are really, really concerned that hey, we're facing this crisis now in the childcare sector. In July, or as you said, maybe even sooner, there's going to be a spike in demand because of these reforms. We aren't going to be able to meet that. So actually, as much as it's looking like, even if we would take it as this huge, cost of living relief, possibly, and be, a bit, as you say, maybe a bit naive with it, but even then, there's some really huge problems about that. That's not as easy as putting these reforms make things easier. It could be a real crisis.